Isn't even a one-eyed man. If central banking belongs to Britain, paper money, government paper money, belongs to America. No people have ever rivaled Americans in their faith or delight in monetary experiment. It began in the colonies, and out of this experimental instinct, paper money was born. The birthplace was here in Massachusetts. The year was 1690, 4 years before the Bank of England was born. Massachusetts soldiers had just returned from a failed campaign against Quebec, where in the same years that playing card money was coming into use. Angry soldiers can be annoying, so they were given notes promising that one day real money would be paid. As with the early banknotes, the money promised was gold or silver. Rhode Island and South Carolina issued notes in huge volume with no thought of eventual redemption. The middle colonies, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, used the new invention with surprising good sense and restraint, found it a great convenience and an antidote to falling prices depressed business. Restraint or not, London did not approve. By 1764, Parliament had fully forbidden this dreadful nonsense as they saw it. The action caused almost as much resentment here in Philadelphia as did the taxes. If you're planning a revolution, you should first of all, no doubt, get a cause and an army. But then, based on all experience, you should get yourself a printing press. Revolutionary governments cannot easily levy taxes, especially if the revolt is against bad taxes. Their credit isn't likely to be good, so they can't borrow. And there remains only the printing of money. Money so printed paid for the Russian Revolution, likewise for the revolt of the Confederate States, likewise for the French Revolution. The famous assignats were issued against the security of the church lands and the land of the nobility. And 200 years ago, paper money paid for the American Revolution. Some of this money was issued by the states, which is not a surprising thing, since as colonies they had pioneered in this particular invention. And the rest of the Continental notes were authorized by the Continental Congress. One predictable result, was severe inflation. By the end of the war, a pair of shoes cost about $5,000 in Virginia, and a full outfit came to around $1 million. But there was no alternative. The colonists, as all know, were greatly opposed to taxation without representation, a principle that was first discussed here in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. And also, a very much neglected point, they were almost equally opposed to taxation with representation. No one thought that the new republic was even a passable credit risk, so only one thing remained: paper money. It was paper money that saved the day. This has, on the whole, never been admitted. When the war was over, the sound money men wrote the history, and they could not have it said that the United States had been conceived in financial sin. So they held that the financing of the revolution was a terrible mess, without ever explaining what would have been practical as well as right. And their view persists pretty much to this day. The Continental note has come down to us only as a symbol of opprobrium. Something is not worth a Continental. The historians even edited Benjamin Franklin. He was a powerful advocate of paper money, and he also printed it on his own press. This is scarcely mentioned. Children are told only that Franklin was a great man in diplomacy and thrift and electricity. The paper money served a high function, but no one liked the resulting inflation, and in consequence, the Constitution forbade the states to issue paper money, even as Parliament had done. It also intended to forbid it to the federal government as well, but the Supreme Court amended the Constitution on this point. Banks had also been prohibited by the British. On these, there was now no prohibition. If the government could not print money, the banks could. A man could set up a bank, print notes, make loans in these notes to himself and to his friends. These would buy horses, cattle, machinery, put the borrower in business. A wonderful thing, a bank. The citizens of the new republic discovered banking as an adolescent discovers fornication. The wonder was not shared by the Eastern merchants and bankers, to whom the notes came as payments for goods or debts. They wanted money that could be redeemed in gold or silver, held, sent on to England to buy goods. Here were the seeds of the most persistent political conflict in American history, and after slavery, the most bitter. It was between the men who wanted good money and those who wanted the bad money that was so good for putting them in business. The conflict began, actually, with Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury. He redeemed the Continental notes at the substantial rate of 1 cent on the dollar, the act of a sound money man. He also established a central bank on the lines of the Bank of England to keep the new state banks in line. It lasted only a few years. The high point of this struggle over good and bad money came in the 1830s. The combatants, Nicholas Biddle, president of the Second Bank of the United States, here hydra-headed, sinister, Andrew Jackson, president of the United States. Biddle was preeminently a member of the Eastern establishment, as the Biddles have been ever since. Andrew Jackson spoke for the frontier, Tennessee. Biddle's second bank, like Hamilton's first, was intended to keep the small banks in line. It returned their notes for collection in gold and silver, forced them to keep their note issue in reasonable relation to their hard cash. This limited the right to create the money that for the frontiersmen seemed like magic, and often was. 1832 was the year of the historic showdown. Early that year, the Friends of the Bank in Congress, led by Henry Clay, renewed the charter of the bank. Jackson came back with a stinging veto. Presidential election was then fought on the issue. Biddle had the money. Jackson had the votes. The bank was defeated. Money doesn't always win. Power is also a one-time thing. Biddle very soon went broke himself. The state banks were wonderfully free then for nearly a century. The carnival again. Once Biddle's hand had been lifted, the state banks exploded in number. Almost anyone could open a bank. It became literally a human right. The best documented story is of the backwoods banks of Michigan. This is a story of imaginative fraud and deception, practiced in the main by men who believed they were rendering a public service. And maybe they were.
1825 to 1836. 18 new banks are chartered in the new state of Michigan.
The Bank of St. Clair, People's Bank of Grand River, the Palmyra and Jacksonburg Railroad Bank, the Goodrich Bank, the Farmers Bank of Sandstone, the Shiawassee Bank, the Bank of Battle Creek, the Bank of Coldwater, the Farmers Bank of Sharon.
Here in Michigan, as elsewhere, banks were required to maintain a specified reserve of gold and silver against the notes that they had printed and loaned out to their customers. Boxes of coins were sent around through the forest just in front of the commissioners. Here is Commissioner Alpheus Finch. His report, like all such reports, was made after the crash. After people had started coming to